moral and political commitments is the issue of like First Nations and like Indigenous land rights in Canada. Like he had like some proposal that would give First Nations the communities like total veto power over like land leases and like cultivation of like their land, basically. What happened with that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so that was abandoned because I guess the need to build pipelines is just too important.
So it was abandoned when it was realized this will prevent the other thing we wanted to.
Yeah,
it was abandoned when they realized they might exercise those powers we might give them.
Yeah, that's right. And there was another thing. They were going to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They actually went to the United Nations and announced that, and they were like, the time is now, and then a couple months later, they were like, oh yeah, no, we're not doing that.
He I believe the quote that you have is that they said that this just isn't workable.
That's right. Yeah. Which sort of begs the question, why did they promise to do it in the first place?
Speaking of pipelines, didn't that motherfucker march in the climate strike?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's
he marched against himself.
Yeah.
Luke, what has the Liberal government done then? What have they delivered on?
I mean, insofar as they actually committed to do anything specific, they've flip-flopped on a lot of the big, like, specific commitments. So they were also going to change Canada's electoral system. They just dropped that. We have like an archaic 19th century electoral system where people
that
win.
Must suck.
Like 100,
19th century.
Sorry about that, dude.
Fuck off.
It's not. Yeah,
I kill for a 19th century electoral system.
It's not as bad as yours, admittedly, but it's pretty bad. You can basically get like 100% of the legislative power with as little as like 34 or 35% of the popular vote, which maybe that could benefit a left-wing party someday. That would be great, but mostly it hasn't done that. But so, yeah, they abandoned electoral reform. I mean, they were also going to raise taxes on the rich, which, I mean, officially they did do that. They created a new tax bracket for, I think it was incomes above $200,000. But then they also cut taxes for the income tax bracket below. So it's actually a net tax cut. And the most of the gains, or the majority of the gains, went to the top 10% of earners. So it's just a total sleight of hand. It's the kind of thing you can imagine like the Center for American Progress coming up with or something. I mean, they did create a child benefit, which I guess is like a means tested grant that goes disproportionately to low income families. The problem with that was that they advanced it kind of explicitly in opposition to a universal childcare program. The Liberals, just like the Democrats, love means testing.
What about refugees and migration?
Yeah, so I mean, the rhetoric around refugees was certainly, much better than anything coming out of the United States. I mean, the NDP in 2015 had a more ambitious program to admit more refugees, which the Liberals attacked the NDP program and then essentially ended up adopting it. I'm actually kind of forgetting the details. It's been a few years. So Trudeau, at least did make a kind of an effort to symbolically embrace the refugee issue. And he tweeted a number of things that I guess were cryptically interpreted as condemnations of Trump. But Canada took, I think a decent number of refugees, but like many fewer per capita than, other countries, I think particularly those in Scandinavia. And I mean, when it comes to actually, updating border policy, I mean, Canadian authorities are still cooperating with, your own border authorities and things like that. So I think very little has changed there.
What you get at in the current affairs piece is that like Trudeau as a political model, like sort of picking up the ball from Obama and running with it. Like what's attractive to you about it is that you have the look of a guy who's sort of
black,
who's POC occasionally, but but also it represents kind of a wholesome, unthreatening masculinity. We have one article here from when he was first election. Justin Trudeau's election redefined politics of manliness, study suggests. And this is, an academic study which purports to claim that, like, Justin Trudeau's he's hot, he's jacked, but he also has feelings and has a boyish sort of demeanor. But more importantly, it's this thing about, like, his politics are about saying things in such a way that reassures all involved that he's one of you without actually saying or committing to anything, and really reassuring, party elites and the wealthy that, he's not going to rock the boat. Right. And you have,
very much so.
And there's one quote here again that we're like, sometimes, like you said, like the mask slips or like the algorithm breaks down a little bit and like too much of what he's actually talking about gets through. So he says here, this was in response to a question, you write, about how his government was navigating the unpopularity of neoliberal globalization at the present political moment. And he said this, quote, "We were able to sign a free trade agreement with Europe at a time when people tend to be closing off. We're actually able to approve pipelines at a time when everyone wants protection of the environment. We're being able to show that we get people's fears and there are constructive ways of allaying them, and not just ways to lash out and give a big kick to the system." So what he's really saying is, like, my politics is about allaying people's fears about the things that I'm doing.
That's right. And I mean, as with Obama, that was always, that was always clear. That was always something he made explicit from the beginning. There was an op-ed that he published. I can't remember in which newspaper it was published. I think in 2013, 2014, something like that. And this was when he was laying out what was supposedly the liberals' like anti-inequality agenda. And he said, national business leaders and other wealthy Canadians should draw the following conclusion, and do so urgently. If we do not solve, the problems facing the middle class and low income earners, and these are Trudeau's words, Canadians will eventually withdraw their support for a growth agenda. We will all be worse off. As a consequence, deepening anxiety yields deepening divisions, and people will begin to vote for leaders who offer comforting stories about who to blame for our problems rather than how to solve them. So he's basically addressing, business leaders and people like that, and he was saying, hey, look, I get it. You don't want to pay higher taxes, but we got to give people something. We got to at least show that, we got to at least pretend to do something, because otherwise, as he puts it, Canadians may withdraw their support for a growth agenda, which is another way of saying, they might vote for people who will actually raise your taxes. And we can't allow that.
No, yeah, you have to allay people's fears, because if they have all this fear and anxiety, then they won't sign on to the pro-growth. So he's just saying, like, go with me. I'm going to allay the dum-dums' fears, and we can still get all the growth that we all want.
Very much so, yeah.
Well, so that's Trudeau. What about the NDP, the ostensible left option?
Yeah, so I mean, the NDP, I think in this election it's moved to the left of where it was last time. The NDP platform last time had a number of decent things in it, but it had this really numbskulled pledge to run balanced budgets, which kind of neutered the other stuff. So this time, the NDP is not doing that. There's the NDP is kind of hard to place relative to other left parties worldwide, just because the political culture here is so different. But so it's I don't think you see a lot of stuff that's kind of maybe as radical as like things that Bernie Sanders is proposing, or some of the stuff that's coming out of British Labour. I'd like to see the NDP be a lot bolder on foreign policy in particular. I'd love to see it embrace some of the stuff around worker ownership and, economic democracy that's coming out of both Britain and the United States right now. But there is some pretty good stuff in the program. In the platform, there's a wealth tax. There's a national childcare program. I think, as actually was mentioned in the intro, there's, expanding Medicare, because our healthcare system was actually designed in the 1960s. So it doesn't cover all kinds of things. It doesn't cover pharmaceutical drugs. It doesn't cover dental. So expanding it to pay for that. Yeah, it's basically a social democratic document with a bit of populism thrown in. I think that Canadian political culture has always been defined by the Liberals. It's always kind of been a politics of like elite brokerage that happens in the political center, and class politics, while it's existed here, has always been sort of a more marginal force. Even when populism has expressed itself historically. It's expressed itself through like regional identities. So, it's the populism of the prairies or of Alberta, where kind of right-wing populism in Canada is based, or it's the populism of, the Quebec sovereignty movement. And so the kind of basic left-right split that happened in most countries sometime in the 20th century never really happened in Canada. And so we're left with kind of this, peculiar political dynamic where we have a fake left-wing party that's actually, party of the neoliberal center right. We have now, I guess, two conservative parties, and then we have a social democratic party that sort of straddles, center-left respectability and, genuine social democracy.
What do you make of their candidate, Jagmeet Singh?
Yeah, so I mean, he's definitely to the left of the previous leader, Thomas Mulcair, who was running on balanced budgets, and he's
Karn looking motherfucker.
I'm sorry.
He looked like the guy from Home Improvement. Richard Karns, look him up. Al Borland.
You.
So people say I look like.
Yeah, so Jagmeet Singh has showed some signs of there's some bold things that he's proposed. So there's when he was running for the leadership, he talked about the need to decriminalize drugs and declare the opioid epidemic, which is something it's really, really serious all over Canada. Declare that a national emergency. As you would expect, having a racialized leader of a political party has kind of unleashed the floodgates of racism have opened right away as soon as he became.
Yeah, I mean
leader.
he's a Sikh. He wears a turban. He's campaigning he's visibly a member of a racial and religious minority.
Yeah, that's right. So just yesterday alone, like in the morning, he was at a market in Montreal campaigning, and a guy came up to him and said, "You should really cut off your turban so you look like a Canadian." And then in the evening, after the televised French language debate, the Bloc Québécois, their Twitter account, this is like a rough translation I got from Twitter, but they tweeted something like, the future is yours. Opt for men and women who look like you, who share your values, who care about your concerns, blah, blah, blah. And then it ends rather ominously with the words, tomorrow belongs to you.
I've heard that phrase somewhere before. I mean, that's rich coming from them. I mean, why don't they fucking speak English, why don't they just speak the language of Canadians? What's all this French shit?
Luke, do you speak French?
I do not. I mean, so I was taught French from grade. I was taught French from the third grade up until grade 11 because, as part of official bilingualism in Canada, you are taught it in public schools. But they sort of teach it, unless you're in French immersion, they sort of teach it with the assumption that you're not really learning it. So you learn vocabulary and you learn how to conjugate verbs. And I don't really remember much of either. Outside of, parts of Quebec are genuinely bilingual, and so is Ottawa. A few parts of Ontario, but besides that, bilingualism is sort of it's something that exists much more institutionally, I think, than as kind of a lived reality.
And how would you describe the NDP in this election? How would you describe their voting base, or the people who support them?
It's a mix of the kind of traditional working class, insofar as that still exists as a social base, union workers, things like that. People in the parts of Ontario that used to have large industrial, manufacturing industries, things like that. Cars and industries like that. But it's also kind of urban progressives. So in downtown Toronto, Vancouver, places like that. And after 2011, the NDP kind of developed a foothold in Quebec, which is something that had long eluded it. Quebec is actually, in some ways, much more culturally and politically social democratic than the rest of Canada. But because the sovereignty issue has historically been so big there, the NDP was never able to achieve a breakthrough. And in 2011, it finally did. It lost some of those seats in 2015, but still maintained a few of them. And so Quebec is definitely a part of the NDP coalition as well.
And how is are the NDP, how are they polling in this election?
The polls right now just don't look very good across the board. I mean, I think the last one I saw, the Conservatives were actually a little bit ahead. The Liberals are not that far behind, and the NDP is kind of neck and neck with the Green Party in the last polls I saw in the low teens. So not too great at the moment. But I think the caveat I'd issue is that even though the election's kind of at the halfway point, Canadian elections are very short. And to be honest, I don't get the sense that a lot of people have really been paying that much attention. There hasn't been a big televised debate involving all of the leaders in English yet. And I think there's still the potential for possibly some pretty big swings. I mean, I'm hesitant to make predictions after the presidential election in 2016, but I'm not sure the outcome is yet to be determined. I think a lot of people are still undecided, and I think there may be a sort of delayed reaction in the polls to the Trudeau blackface scandal.
Do you think that's going to help him in Quebec?
Trudeau or the NDP?
Trudeau.
I don't think it necessarily will. I mean, the main thing the Liberals, I mean, I don't think it will help them. I think it will, it's a drag wherever they go. I mean, I was actually at a local debate the other night, and the incumbent Liberal MP didn't mention Justin Trudeau's name a single time, which I thought was pretty revealing.